Alright, here we are in the shop. Got a tubular that's about ready for gluing. And what we need here is a wheel and something to put the wheel where it'll spin. You can either use a truing stand like I have here, or you can use a bike if you don't have one. Now, this is all you need really. You need a tubular and a butter knife, preferably one that you're no longer using in the kitchen, and disposable rubber glove and some glue. This is what we use the butter knife for. It's just a process where I scrape off any glue that might be dried on. It doesn't have to come off unless it's dried up and crumbly. And generally, you end up with just a small amount of it coming off, really. The rest of it is not going to harm the glue joint. In fact, it's going to help the glue joint because the solvent that's in the fresh glue is going to partially melt what's on here. So it's almost like you have another layer of glue at your disposal. That's what the butter knife is for. Now, I've already cleaned up this rim pretty well, so we'll move on. Now, as you can see here, I've got a tubular that's, well, this is a used one, and I removed it from the wheel just prior to using it now. The glue that's on there, again, is going to act just like the stuff that was on the rim. It'll actually help the glue joint. And the reason why I'm inflating it now is going to be evident once we actually see what happens. The great thing about tubulars is that they can hold full pressure without being put on a rim. In fact, all they do is turn themselves inside out, which is going to be very helpful as I pump this thing up for us to be able to put glue on it. See, now the base tape is faced almost completely up, and I just remove the pump, and I'm going to close this up because we're going to leave this thing inflated for the duration of this process. And this is what your tubular is going to look like after you inflate it. Sometimes it ends up going the other way, and then all you have to do is just flip the tire over. So it helps if you have a little workbench area. Now the next step in the process is we're going to just be putting a little bit of glue on here. I just put a small bead of glue running the entire length of the base tape. It doesn't have to be much. In fact, you're almost better off using a smaller amount at this point. Now, I close that glue up because it does evaporate very quickly. Now, this is the reason why I'm using a disposable glove. All I do is just take one finger and distribute the glue in an even and thin layer on the entire run of the base tape. And this is going to keep your hands clean, and it's going to effectively spread the glue on this base tape exactly the way you want it. You can use a brush, but I don't think it's worth it because you probably have to use several brushes throughout this process, whereas you can get away with just one glove. And you can use the same glove for the next part of the procedure, which is this. I'm just going to open up my glue again, find the valve hole, which is right here. There's a valve hole, and we're just going to, again, run a very light bead of glue get to the valve hole on the other side, which is right there. Now, as you can see, I haven't used much of this glue. I've maybe used 1/3 of it. And this entire job, from start to finish, is going to require probably less than 1 tube of glue. And let me tell you, the joint's going to be so strong, you'll need tools to remove it. So, this is the most important step in this process so far. If I had a camera operator, it would help. Let me see if I can show it to you here. You're taking one finger and you're sticking it into the rim like this to try to distribute the glue so that it ends up on the edges of the rim. The whole key to the enterprise is to get glue all the way to these edges of the rim. By the edge of the rim, I mean this part here. You can probably hear how my finger sort of sticking to that. People sometimes wonder how much glue to use. The important thing in glue joints is to make sure that you have a thin but even layer. If it's a thick layer, it's not going to be very useful as a joint because it's mainly just going to be glue. What you want is a thin but even layer that goes throughout this entire area here. You can see how it's shiny. I've got this shininess that exists throughout, and it's the same thing on the tire itself. You want to have a thin layer of glue. It's not going to take very long at all for this stuff to become, less tacky and ready to mount. Now it's up to you how many coats you want to use. Personally, I don't use all that many coats. I'll let this dry and then do one more before mounting the tire on the rim. So I've put my 2 coats on, and it's been about 20 minutes since the second coat. As you can see, I'm not getting any sticky goo on my fingertips, but it's got just enough tack that it feels like it's going to go on there pretty good. That's the nice thing about putting on thin coats. First of all, you don't even use up the whole thing of glue. I still have a little bit left. Second of all, the drying time is much quicker in between coats and before you're going to actually mount the tire. So now let's mount the tire. I'm going to let all the air out. Now ordinarily I would have put sealant in, but this is winter time, so we're just going to go without sealant, and then I'll inject the sealant in later when it comes time to actually ride the tire outside. But if I'm just going to use it on rollers, then no sealant. Get this tire nice and flat, get all the air out, close this up so that no air goes in. Get my wheel, and the first thing we're going to do is find the valve hole. This goes in here first. This is where if you do this wrong, you end up with a hop. And I don't want to hop, so I'm going to invert the wheel and just push down right here where the valve is. Just push that down. Get that right in there. Now once that's in, I'm just going to get most of the rest of this tire in the right spot. I want to try to have just a couple of millimeters of light base tape showing on either side. Now this tire is a little bit off center, but we can fix that later. So once it's most of the way on, I have a couple of ways of doing this. This tire's been well stretched, so it really doesn't take much. Just flipping it on like that, that's all you got to do. And then, before I do anything further, I'm just going to get it so that the base tape is coming out just a couple millimeters on each side. And that's really my guide for getting it on straight. I want to see just enough of it so that you can see the base tape, like that. And on the other side, although this tire is sort of strange, see about the same amount. For some reason this tire is all slightly folded over, which it's only going to be an issue while the tire's flat. Once you put air in, no problem. So, got this tire on there pretty good. And the next step, of course, is going to be to put air in it. The first amount of air that I put in is about 30 pounds. Just enough to give the tire some shape. I want it to be somewhat tire-like and not like a dead fish anymore. So we'll put in about 30 pounds of pressure, which is about that much. Take this off, and now I'm just going to make sure that this thing's on there nice and even. With this amount of pressure, the tire is very movable, and since I waited the 20 minutes rather than doing this while the glue was still all gloopy, I'm not having to deal with any sort of weird liquid glue getting on my hands. So now with this particular rim, what you want is even less than 2 millimeters of base tape. I want just the tiniest hint of base tape showing on this side, so it'll be just the same on the other side. Okay, now we've got it pretty good. I'll give it one spin on here just to make sure there's no lumps. So a lump is much easier to remove now rather than once it's well glued. Now I found one right here. Seems to be right around where the valve is, so may not be much I can do. The valve tends to just sort of create its own lump at times, but that's on there nice and straight. So the next step is going to be to pump this sucker up to 100 pounds. And then I'll show you the final step. Just get this on here. This is my backup pump, so it may just find its way off without me even taking it off. It tends to slide off of these things pretty easily. Okay. That's 100 pounds. And now we've got one last thing to do. The final step in the process of mounting a tubular is you need to pressurize the glue joint. It's a pressure-sensitive adhesive. It's a contact cement. Contact cement is it's not necessarily going to need to be really sticky in order for it to stick. It has to be pressurized. And so this is what I do. I use my body weight and I just lean on the tire like that. Just make these little semicircles with it. And then I start where I finish there. And I just keep doing this all the way around the entire tire so that I've pressurized every part of it. Just keep adding pressure to the entire glue joint all the way around the tire. This is probably the most important step that you have to do in order to ensure that your tire has a really good glue joint. So it's not going to come off no matter what. Whether it's a hot day, extreme braking conditions, going downhill, whatever. You don't want this thing to roll. And a lot of people are going to assume that to keep a tire from rolling, you've got to use as much glue as possible. That's not true. You need to use the right amount of glue. You need to make sure that there's a large surface area of glue joint, especially the edges. Once you get that, then you just give this thing until tomorrow morning. Before you ride it, you should be good to go. So tomorrow morning, we're going to let the air out of this thing and check it.